Welcome, and today I will be building a cheap small form factor PC designed for gaming. You can probably do something similar since our build cost is only going to be about $800. This is mostly thanks to the power of Intel's 12th gen CPUs and a lower cost previous generation graphics card. But at such a low price for the notoriously expensive ITX form factor, the question is, will its performance actually be any good? I'm going to start with some unboxing, and then we'll talk about the parts I chose to build the PC, and then we'll put it all together. The focus of this video is building an ITX form factor PC that is in a smaller than average case, and doing it on a budget. For this build, I've decided to go with the Cooler Master NR200P. It does allow you to get a very high quality case, but at a price that is not necessarily going to break the bank. You could go with a cheaper case, something like $60, mid-tower case, but the ITX form factor does offer some advantages, and I've wanted to build in ITX for a long time. I am more used to building in mid-tower cases. This is my first ITX build. So why ITX? To give you an idea, compare a build from 2015 to a more modern build today. An older build might have featured 3 slots for CD/DVD drives and 6 slots for hard disks. These space-intensive components just aren't really a thing anymore, and these big slots in modern cases are becoming more and more rare. They're just not needed anymore. Gone are the days of multi-GPU systems, big hard drives and sound cards taking up a whole PCI slot. So why even bother with a large case anymore? In my view, it doesn't actually make that much sense unless you really need the extra space. The Cooler Master NR200, it is a bit larger when it comes to ITX cases, but with that larger size, you do get support for a lot of parts. This is the P iteration of the NR200 case. The P designation just means that you get a riser cable, which is nice if you want to mount your GPU vertically, and it comes with an additional glass side panel. This build is going to be a completely air-cooled build, so those 2 top-mounted fans that we get with the case are going to come in nice and handy for ensuring that our system stays nice and cool. I'm going to have a full parts list at the end of the video, as well as a discussion of some alternative parts. Maybe you've got a higher budget and are looking to spend a bit more to get some better performance, or maybe you have a lower budget and you want to save a few dollars on some parts. I'll offer some ways that you can do that while still coming out with a great budget ITX gaming PC. Next up on our list, we have the Intel Core i3-12100F processor. This particular CPU only cost me $105, so it's a really great value. This is the budget king. It's got great single core performance. It's only got a 58 watt TDP, which means that it'll stay nice and cool even under load, and we don't need a big cooler for it. The limitation of it, however, is that it only runs 4 cores, which is standard for some years ago, but today you're more likely to be seeing CPUs that are running 6 or 8 or even more cores. Still, I think this CPU is a great choice, and you probably will have to run really, really high frames per second before you start hitting any kind of bottleneck. It's going to be a great budget option CPU. An important choice when it comes to any Intel 12th generation build is going to be what motherboard do you use. Now, if you want all the bells and whistles at a higher price, you could get a Z690 and you could get something with DDR5 support. That'll be the absolute best. For this, we're going with the most bare bones motherboard you can get, which is the H610 chipset. This particular one, however, has some extra features. It's the Asus H610i. It doesn't have any CPU overclocking, which is fine because we're working with a locked CPU. However, this one does have PCIe 4.0 support, which is nice. Be careful though, not all H610 chipsets will support 4.0. Some may only support 3.0. This one allows DDR4 memory, which is good because DDR4 is a lot cheaper than DDR5, although it is slower. This board does have XMP support, which is great. Again, not all H610 boards will have this. On the downside, there's no Wi-Fi with this board at all, and it doesn't have a lot of USB ports, so something to pay attention to. Next up on our parts list, we're going to be talking about the graphics card. For this build, I've decided to go with the NVIDIA RTX 2060. This happens to be the Asus ROG Strix version, and it happens to be a used card. If you're willing to go for a used card, you can get some pretty solid performance for not that much money these days. I've tested this 2060 with my main gaming PC, and I got pretty good performance when paired with a higher end CPU. This one happens to use PCIe 3.0, which fits well with pretty much any motherboard. If you're going to go with the 2060, you might want to consider a smaller and less expensive iteration. 2 fans of cooling should be plenty of cooling for something like this, which doesn't actually pull that much power in. If you don't want to go with the 2060, there are plenty of other alternatives out there. For example, you could go with a relatively low-cost GeForce GTX 1080. Although it is a fairly old card at this point, when it came out it was an absolute killer and it will still be able to hold its own. Best of all, you'll be able to pick one of these up for less than $200 on eBay, which is a very nice price. Another option that you could go for is the Radeon RX 5600. You could also go with an RX 6600 XT. Those are about $300 and are going to have a really good price to performance ratio. Comparing, say, the RX 5600 XT, it's going to have almost identical performance to the 2060, so definitely a very solid possible option. If you are going for something used, do look at the RTX 2070 Super. These seem to hit the sweet spot of price to performance. I've seen these for under $300 on eBay, and they have performance that's almost comparable to an RTX 3060 Ti. Speaking of the 3060 Ti, if you want to go for something that's a little higher end, a 3060 Ti or even a 3070 will pair pretty well with this CPU setup. So wouldn't be afraid to run a relatively higher end card with the 12100F. It's a very solid CPU. If you are, however, going for something like a 3080, you may at that point want to start looking at like an i5 CPU. Probably you're going to want to look at some faster RAM as well. Next up on our parts list, for the power supply, we're going to be going with the Cooler Master V750 SFX Gold Rated White Edition. This power supply is complete overkill for this build at 750 watts. It was mostly selected for aesthetic purposes, as the white cables are going to look very nice and match our white case. Now, like I said, it's complete overkill for this build. You could go with something like a 450 watt power supply. EVGA makes a Supernova Edition one, which goes for about $85, which is a very viable power supply to use in this system. Corsair also makes SFX power supplies, but your choices in SFX power supplies are a bit limited. This one is going to give us some nice upgradability for the future. If supposing I want to upgrade to a higher end GPU in the future, go for a better CPU, all of that is going to be available to me with this power supply. The final items in our parts list, for our RAM, we're going to be going with 16 gigabytes of T-Force DDR4 3200 CL18 memory. It's a little slow, nothing special, but it should be enough to get the job done here. For the last part on our list, I'm taking advantage of our M.2 slot on our motherboard and filling it with a Samsung 970 EVO SSD. That should provide very fast read-write speeds and pair nicely with this setup. Now that we've got our parts list together, let's go ahead and assemble this. After finishing my first ITX build, I can say it actually wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. It was pretty easy to cable manage, and everything turned out pretty well. I only had to tweak one or two things when I had a CPU fan error the first time I started it up, but after fixing that, everything worked perfectly. I'm doing a little bit of testing. This is actually the first time I ran any kind of game on this system. It's Halo Infinite. I'm running it in 1440p, so relatively high resolution, and it's in medium settings. And I've got DLSS turned off, and I've got XMP turned off. So there is probably a little bit of headroom with XMP and maybe overclocking the graphics card to get even better performance out of this, but I'm getting around 50 to 55 frames per second on average, so that's not bad. To end the video, I'm going to show the final parts list. In the center column, you'll see the build as I built it on the screen, but on the left I'll have a slightly lower budget build, and on the right hand side, that's my suggestion for if you have a bit of a higher budget, what you can do to get even better performance out of a system like this without breaking the bank. That's all for today, and thank you for watching.